AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by...
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Autoline After Hours. You just saw we have a new sponsor, Alex Partners. Really good news for us here. But hello, Mr. Gary.
How you doing, John?
Doing well. You too?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're here and live and kicking. We got
Pete
Pete Bigelow from Automotive News with us, who's just come off a vacation from Hawaii and doesn't know anything, and we're going to teach him all he needs to know.
It's amazing how much you miss when you skip out of town for 2 weeks.
Right. So, Gary, where should we start? We got a lot of topics.
We can't not start at the biggest news of the week, the announcement of Ford this week in Louisville, Kentucky.
The Universal EV platform.
And the universal production platform to build the universal EV.
Right.
So what do you make of it, John?
I think it's bold. I think it's gutsy. I think it's a big risk. I think they could fall flat on their face and burn through $5 billion like that. And I also think that the bigger risk was not doing it. I mean, these legacy automakers have got to figure out how to make a profit on electric vehicles, especially with all the incentives going away, or at least incentives to buy them. It's up to the car companies now to figure out what do we do here? And at the same time, not just sell more EVs and be profitable at them, be able to compete almost toe-to-toe with the Chinese. And I think Ford gets very close to doing that.
Pete, what do you think?
Much like John, I thought what was unsaid was that there's a greater risk in not doing anything and staying still than there is in ultimately going forward with a risky plan. But they couldn't stand still. I thought they had to answer the Chinese competition in some way and start preparing for that eventuality that the Chinese vehicles will be here in America. And they're the first to really kind of put forward a comprehensive plan among the domestics to do that.
Okay, you got the points, Gary. Let's hear the counterpoint.
So I God bless both of you. You're both wrong. So basically, if they are allegedly swinging for the fences, as it were, in any regard to this thing, let's put the vehicle to the side, because there is so little information about this vehicle. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. I mean, I see our journalistic colleagues, talking about it's going to cost $30,000. Okay, I did a little check when the Lightning came out, the first Ford electric pickup. It was priced at $39,974.
Well, that was the announcement. I don't know if
it did. Okay, and then in the second year, there was a 37% price increase, and it went to $49,995. And that is for the entry professional model that you had to be a contractor to get. So this 30, that's nonsense. That's just, so we'll put that to the side. Okay. So then I started thinking, okay, so the universal production system that they have devised. So I got to think, because they kept talking about how it looked like a tree, right? So basically you have a line going down the middle, and you have two branches to the side. And so they're going to build one third here, one third here, one third here, and then bring the thirds together. And so I started thinking, do you remember the smart plant that was built in Hambach, France?
Yeah.
And it was shaped like a cross. Okay. And they did it one better. I would say they did it like 100 better. Rather than having their people basically make everything, is that they had suppliers bring everything in. So you had Magna doing the chassis. You had Siemens doing the entire cockpit. You had ThyssenKrupp doing the propulsion unit. You had Continental bringing in tire sets. They'd come to the cross, they'd put them in, boom. Okay? That was revolutionary. Oh, but wait, there's more. Now, don't worry. I don't know if
you continue while I put rounds in my chamber.
All right.
So fire back.
Now, I don't know if you've ever met him, but I know that John has. Our friend, the late Mark Hogan. Mm-hmm. And Mark Hogan, he worked at General Motors, and he had been at NUMMI, and then he was like an expert on lean manufacturing. Just the guy was, Toyota, like he knew so much about. And in fact, he got on the board of Toyota.
He did.
I mean, so this guy,
first foreigner ever to go on the board.
Dude was a complete wizard when it came to lean manufacturing. So they went down to Brazil and they had the Blue Macaw project. And this was to revolutionize manufacturing. Again, what did they do? They depended largely on suppliers bringing in the goods and were able to make cost-effective vehicles with very little line side inventory or anything like that. Okay, and this goes back to like 1990. Okay, then there was the General Motors Yellowstone project, which was going to do it here. Now, this was, the plants are going to be 1/3 the size and require 1/3 fewer workers than traditional GM plants, would have a capacity from 215,000 to 250,000 vehicles. They were going to have supplier parks that were going to be right by the plant. There would be 15 key modules. They'd all be brought together because this plant is smaller. And they were going to be using the latest technology in terms of, ergonomic tools and nut runners that were electrified and on and on and on. And it didn't work because the UAW didn't want that to happen. So when I hear about this revolutionary manufacturing system that Ford has developed, I think to myself, if it goes back to 1990 in France by a company that was started by a watch manufacturer, not so sure you guys are thinking straight on this.
Well, a couple of thoughts on that. Then, I believe it was actually Iñaki Lopez, after he left GM and went to Volkswagen, started this idea of having suppliers located right in the assembly plant. And I went down to the plant in Brazil that Iñaki launched for Volkswagen to build buses down there. And sure enough, you had different suppliers that would do their thing. And as the vehicle came down the line, they'd put in their engine or they'd put in their seats or whatever it happened to be. But fast forward to today, where you've got software-defined vehicles, and we're going to get into this later with Pete, and zonal centralized compute, where automakers now want to write all the software for these components, not rely on the software suppliers have written. Because if you want to do over-the-air updates and be able to update just about anything in the vehicle, you need these zonal centralized compute systems. So suppliers are sort of being marginalized by this new technology right now. Also, Tesla has kind of shown, and now others have followed, like BYD and others in China, that vertical integration makes a lot of sense in a lot of areas. And if you can build this stuff in-house, you don't have to pay the supplier margin for it. Now, you do have to pay the upfront capital cost of doing it, but you capture all the profit margin, all of it. You don't have to share that with suppliers. And so I would say what might have made sense in 1990 doesn't make as much sense today. And, if you look at what Ford's doing, look, you got two top Tesla guys running this program. Doug Field, who's overseeing everything at Ford that's got to do with EVs and advanced product. And you got a guy named Alan Clark that's running the whole Skunk Works program. When they were at Tesla, Alan Clark reported to Doug Field. Doug Field reported directly to Elon Musk. So you got two Tesla guys that really know what they're doing. And they've taken all their lessons learned at Tesla and said, hey, it's years later, we know how to make it better. And that's what they're applying here. And when you look at some of the productivity that's coming out of this change, it's dramatic. They're getting rid of 600 people in that plant. That's a superb reduction in headcount. And the UAW is going along with this, which is even more amazing because, like you said, Steve Yokich, former UAW president, when Mark Hogan was trying to bring in this super ultra efficient thing. And by the way, one of the reasons GM wanted suppliers to build all that stuff, because suppliers pay their workers less than GM had to. And that's one of the reasons why Yokich was against it. He didn't want to see suppliers getting paid less, and he didn't want to see UAW jobs going away. Anyway, long story short, Ford's getting rid of 600 people, and it's going to insource a lot more than it's done before. They wouldn't say what they're going to insource, but I'm guessing instrument panel, that would make a lot of sense. So much componentry goes into the instrument panel. Seats, why not make seats like Tesla does in-house? Wouldn't surprise me at all that a couple of Tesla guys say, let's make seats in-house. So,
well, Ford used to make seats.
They did, until, UAW wages got crazy, and then they realized that it was better to pay suppliers to buy the stuff. But what I'm getting at is I think what Ford's got here is a real shot at being able to have electric vehicles in that plant that are going to be profitable, not year one, maybe operationally profitable. But I mean, look, they're saying it's a $5 billion investment with the battery plant and the assembly plant. It's going to take a long time to pay off that investment.
So, Pete, what do you think before I tell him why he's wrong?
Yeah.
Well, along similar lines, I feel like 20% fewer parts, 40% fewer workstations. You mentioned
think about that. 40% fewer workstations.
That's incredible.
That's a staggering statistic.
I was a little curious. Ford said that the size of the plant is actually like physically going to grow. And I would think with the fewer workstations, they would have an opportunity to shrink the size of the plant or shrink the size that they're using now. But if you think about the future when you're building greenfield,
right?
If you're going to suddenly be building smaller factories, somewhere down the line, I see the prospect of cutting billions out of those capital costs as well. This is the first real iteration.
Well, and we'll get into this too. I'm sure Ford's talking about unicastings. They're not as big as the gigacastings. They're unicastings. Are they going to cast those in the plant? And I think the plant footprint growing in size speaks to the amount of, I'm guessing, because they didn't divulge that, speaks to the fact that they're going to insource a lot more work. That's okay, Gary, tell us why we're wrong.
So to your point, okay, if we go back to those Yellowstone plants, 1/3 the size, right? So this means 1/3 less energy to power the plant, right? And we know energy is going to become increasingly expensive thanks to all those EVs that are not going to be on the road, data centers. Okay, so basically, it seems to me that this is not a revolution in process as much as it is clever design of what is being produced. Okay, so they're talking about, again, going back to the the front, the middle, and the rear end. Okay, and making it in such a way that you can't make internal combustion engine powered vehicles that way. Okay, you're not going to be able to suddenly say, okay, we're going to have engine decking somewhere that's going to be in this line.
I think you could do this with I don't internal combustion. Absolutely. I don't see why not.
I don't see it happening. I don't think it's possible because there'd be such profound variation from the way that this thing is probably going to be set up. But again, I get back to the whole notion of this design of the vehicle is the clever bit. But then I wonder, if we keep talking about,
I think manufacturing is the clever bit, actually.
I just don't see
if they can achieve those real numbers.
I'm going to take a middle ground. I think both go together. They co-developed the vehicle and the process simultaneously. So they brought in manufacturing people from Dearborn to work on this, for example, and then they floated other people in and out of the program on an as-needed basis. But I think this is dramatically different. They're going to gut that plant. You're not going to see long assembly lines running like you do in the plant right now today. They're breaking the car into 3 modules, front, center, rear. And I don't see why you can't do an internal combustion. I mean, instead of a gas tank, you got a battery, or vice versa. Instead of an electric motor, you got an internal combustion engine.
Except for the battery is the floor of this vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fuel tank is not going to be the floor of the vehicle.
Doesn't matter. You just put a floor in instead of a battery pack.
I don't know. I would tend to agree with Gary. I think it'd be hard to do with an ICE engine because you can't quite Lego it all together in the same straightforward way.
So here's a question though, that so the aforementioned Lightning, how well is it selling?
Not.
Okay, so here they are, $5 billion for vehicles that are not selling very well. So why is this a good investment? Why aren't they putting more money?
Go ahead, Pete.
Why are they not putting more money into the Kentucky truck plant, which is down the road from the Louisville assembly plant, where they're building profitable Ford Expeditions and Lincoln Navigators?
Because I'll tell you why. None of the legacies are going to put much money into their ICE products. They are going to milk this for all the profit they can get for as long as they can. And so if you're selling Kentucky trucks with whopping big profits, what do you need to invest for?
Build more.
Whopping profit.
Build more.
What I think is interesting and kind of disquieting to think about here is that you can buy a Maverick hybrid today for the base model is $28,145. So if I can get that today and achieve 40 miles per gallon, what am I waiting a couple of years for to get to pay a little bit more for a product that I now have to plug into the wall and charge? And how those sales go together or don't, or cannibalize or complement is at best a very big question.
Yeah, it is. And, that's a really good point. But I believe this plant's going to make a lot more than that truck. So they wouldn't divulge exactly, but they hinted at a lot of things. So they're talking about a small CUV, small crossover, medium-sized crossover, a 3-row crossover, and a van. Looks like a cargo van, looks like it could be a passenger van too. So, and they're going to have mega reuse of all the componentry. What they said is there's going to be minimal top hat modification to get these variants of models. So if you look at it that way, even if it's just, let's say, 4 models, instead of having to sell 200,000 little electric pickups, maybe now you only have to sell 20, 30,000 of each one of those models to fill the truck. And that strategy makes a lot of sense to me.
So we've seen so far through July EV sales going down in the United States. This is despite, as we've talked about the show many times, that more people who are interested in EVs are grabbing them while they can before the $7,500 goes away. So despite that, despite the fact that people are treating this like Black Friday at Best Buy, trying I got to get it, sales are going down. So why is it that this is going to be a successful thing in 27 when perhaps people will be used to having their 40 miles per gallon from their Ford Maverick pickup truck, or their 55 miles per gallon from a Civic hybrid?
Yeah, look, there's a big chunk of the market, by the market research studies, of which we've had people on the show talking about that. There's a big chunk of the car buying public that is very interested in buying an EV, but the price isn't right, or the model that they want isn't right, or the brand that they love doesn't do it, and they want to see more charging stations. And once those boxes get checked off, they're going to go, I'm ready. I want to try it. The other thing too is, and I think what Ford's looking at is not necessarily, they're not looking at us. They're looking at a much younger generation that does care about the environment, is concerned about driving an electric car, want to do their part, but the right vehicle hasn't been there for them. And what they're trying to do, I think, Ford is, which every automaker tries to do every time it's got a new generation. If you can grab that generation and ride that wave, you can go for decades. I mean, the best example that I can think of is in the 70s, early 70s, really, the Japanese attracted the love of the baby boom generation and has ridden that for 30 years. So I think Ford's looking ahead and going, okay, look, we got to be able to compete with the Chinese. We got to be able to go way faster. We're not going to touch our ICE products because we got to milk them for all the profits they can get. So let's do it with electric. Let's bring in a couple of Tesla guys. Let's figure out how to do it even better than Tesla. And like I said, I think the bigger risk was not doing it.
Okay, so this competition with the Chinese. Now, this is another thing that I don't understand. So you've driven the BYD Seagull, and how much did it cost?
It was $10,500 when I drove it, and I think it's down to $8,500 now.
And how much is that Ford truck going to be?
I know, but
quite a delta there.
Yeah, no, it's a big delta. And there's other things going on in China that, for example, it looks like the cost of capital for them is nothing. They can get any money that they want. As we know, almost all the Chinese car companies are losing money. So they're not making money.
All right, but we got to stipulate that there's like so many Chinese car companies that if we made a list, it wouldn't even fit on this wall.
That's right.
So
right.
Well into 3 figures.
Yeah. So there's only a handful that make money. Also, the Chinese, and in fact, Richard Truitt wrote a good article in Automotive News this week about it. though I've written about it before too, massive parts sharing amongst all Chinese automakers. They all use the same windshield washer motor. They all use, fill in the blank. They just buy the same, the Chinese government, or there's some agency, has written specifications for all kinds of parts that the customer could care less about. And the Chinese all buy the same thing.
It's like the Chinese read Confessions of a Capital Junkie from Sergio Marchionne.
Yeah, right.
And they took the ball and ran with that.
Exactly.
That's exactly it.
Exactly right.
Yes.
And, and Richard in his article called for that. The Detroit Three ought to get together and say, why don't we commonize stuff? I mean, I made a whole list of things. One great example, tire pressure monitor systems. Every wheel and tire on a car has got a tire pressure monitor. It's the same thing. It does the same thing. Every automaker has a different one. Oh, no. They got to have their design. I mentioned windshield wipers, door hinges, the fuel filler opening for your gas tank, where you put the nozzle in at the gas station. There's so many things that could be commonized without even thinking about it. But they don't do it. In fact, I
heard that fuel filler guy, and that was your job. You don't want to commonize.
You don't want to hear about that. That's exactly right. But I remember talking with one of the companies in town here, and they said, yeah, we're designing a whole new front suspension for one of the automakers. And we said, well, you got a front suspension that will work. Why are you redesigning it? He said, well, we got the budget. We're doing it. And that was the logic. We got the budget. We're going to spend it.
Well, there's, the procurement departments are all kind of locked in on specific products here. Whereas talking with CareSoft earlier this year, is the Chinese automakers have gotten together and, figured out how they can fuse parts together, use fewer parts, acquire fewer parts that the American automakers just don't do. It's like your windshield washer fluid tub has to be, here, and certain hoses have to go around it, and the Chinese have figured out how to bring all that together rather than acquire A, B, and C separately.
Right.
So, okay, but let's get back to this $30,000 versus something that isn't $30,000.
Okay, so 30. Remember when GM said the Equinox was going to be $30,000, and now I think it starts at 32 or 33,000. That's probably what you're going to see happen here. Ford's probably closer to the 30,000 than to the 32 or 33,000. What I do think you'll see is all of these vehicles will be under $40,000 out the door at the dealership for under 40 grand. Because they mentioned that several times. The market for under $40,000 is very underserved. So that's what I picked up on. These vehicles are going to be in the $30,000 range. One of them will have a base price very, very, very close to 30 grand, but that's what it'll come out at.
But it isn't China competitive. And see, I think part of the problem is that, you were mentioning earlier, the Japanese, when they came to this market, and they resonated with people because what they were offering and the size and the price and so on, that if the rumor were to become true, and if BYD were to build a factory in the US, and if that factory were down south, and if they had low cost labor, and if they were able to put out a vehicle, and there's a lot of damn ifs there.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing they would be closer to, let's say, $22,000 for something comparable.
I don't think so.
Pete is shaking his head. For all of you who are listening to this, know that I have someone agreeing with me.
Well, I do. I think it'll be closer to 20 and maybe 20, 22,
Why? How can
23.
you do that? I mean, you're going to buy American steel because otherwise you're paying tariffs on everything. You're going to buy American aluminum, otherwise you're paying tariffs. You're not going to import parts from China. You're going to pay tariffs on that. So you got to buy all this stuff in the U.S. and you got to pay American workers. I don't see how the Chinese, even in America, get cheaper than what Ford's doing.
Okay. If we were to take, and I'm just guessing here, if we were to take a look at the cost of producing a vehicle by Hyundai in its Meta plant in South Carolina, where somehow they're able to afford to be able to produce a 3-row electric SUV that Ford can't produce, and they're using all of the above.
And the price of that again is $77,000.
That's when you're at a high trim level.
Okay, so $70,000.
I think it's less than
I
that.
mean, it's 70 grand out the door. And also, Hyundai has been importing a lot of componentry from Korea, essentially tariff-free. Them days is over. So, and I don't mean to berate Hyundai. I think they do a terrific job. All I'm saying is that I think Ford is really on to something here. In fact, I think it's going to force every other single legacy automaker to go, holy crap. Just like if you want to go back to 1913 and Ford started the moving assembly line, every other automaker in the world went, holy crap, we got to do that too. And they did. And I think the same thing's going to happen again. And here's why I'm saying the moving assembly line is terribly inefficient. It's up to 30% inefficient. And there's a lot of reasons, but I'll explain one thing. You're walking, you're a line worker, right? And the car's coming down the line and you got a workstation. And as it comes down, you're walking alongside it and you're putting parts on it. When you get to the end of your workstation, now you got to walk back. And that's all completely non-value added time. And so you have thousands of people in the plant working 8 hours, every single station, all this waste, it adds up to about 30%. This is why by breaking these things into modules, Ford was able to take 40% of the workstations out. And that's how you make up for the inefficiency of the moving assembly line. You just add more workstations and more workers. And it can click them out really quickly.
So how is this different than what they're doing in the smart plant, where basically they were coming in with complete modules, boom?
Yeah, no, it's very much similar along those lines. But has anybody copied what Smart did? And look at Smart. I mean, it's been a complete and total flop. It's never made a penny in its total existence.
But now it's owned by Geely, so I think it might be.
Well, Geely's not doing it in France.
Oh, they moved it to China.
They moved it to China, and they're not doing the cross.
Well, no, but my point being that modular assembly is no wizardry that no one has ever thought of before.
Neither was the moving assembly line when you go back
but it was because that was taken from the meat processing industry.
From the slaughterhouses.
Right. So,
and the grain mills.
That's where that came from. But I'm just saying that in terms of automotive manufacturing, automotive technology, this ain't new. Okay? And to your point earlier, the unicastings are basically a variation on the mega castings. How long has Tesla been using these? 5 years?
Yeah, right. Well, again, you got a couple of Tesla guys in there and go, hey, boom, we can get rid of all kinds of
But I'm just saying
stampings.
again, this is iterative. This is not revolutionary.
30,000-foot view. I've kind of been thinking a lot about this lately. Everything old is new again. It always seems that way. And I wrote about this a little bit on Substack this week. There's this Regent Sea Glider craft that they're doing a hydrofoiling plane vessel, I should say, that flies in ground effect. And they're doing both commercial and military applications. They talked about it at Reindustrialize.
Is this for water or?
For water,
yeah. Okay.
Yes. So in Detroit, they were unveiling it at Reindustrialize about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a little bit about them a few weeks ago, and someone emailed me and was like, hey, the U.S. Navy or U.S. Maritime Administration was doing these hydrofoiling tests back in the 50s and 60s and sent a whole bunch of clippings and, same general concept that's been updated. And there's so many examples of, autonomous vehicles. General Motors was pitching them at Futurama in 1939. There was a guy named Francis Houdina who was pioneering the radio-controlled car in 1925. So everything we think of as next generation technology here, I always find these examples that go back to post-World War, drones in World War II or et cetera. Like this is all iterative.
The V1 was the first drone ever, right? So that goes way back. There are no new ideas in the world. Every knowledge built on top of something else that was there. So when Ford comes out with a plant that has got to gut it, got to put in something that has 40% fewer workstations and gets rid of 600 people in the plant. I think that's revolutionary.
Okay, so do you think that as we get closer and closer to the reality of this situation, that the UAW is still going to be happy about losing 600 people?
No, I can't believe they're happy. One iota.
No, but I mean, but I'm saying is that now it's just like, yeah, that's a long time from now. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
If it's through attrition that they lose those 600 people, and then they're thinking, well, we saved these 2,000 or so others, then maybe that's where their eye is on the prize. Like nobody's losing a job today.
Right. No one will get laid off because of this.
Right.
They will either retire or, you got the Kentucky truck plant right down the road. They can transfer there.
They made it bigger. They could sell more expeditions. And
they are going to sell more expeditions.
They'd make a lot more money.
Look, Ford has been constrained with, ZEV credits, having to buy them and stuff like that. They've had to limit the sale of expeditions and navigators and full-size pickups in certain times. And they look at, we're going to have to pay these fines or buy those credits. Now that's all gone.
Okay, so let me raise another point. This is from our friend Lindsay Brooke, who we had on the show last month.
Yeah.
And so this is Lindsay was suggesting, and he is a Ford owner.
Owns a Maverick.
I should point that out. And he said, so here's Ford talking about a new product with a new process in a new plant, and that he recalls that manufacturing expert Jim Harbour once said that is a recipe for complete and utter failure. And Lindsay layered on top of that observation the multitudinous recalls that Ford has had this year. The question that he raises is, gee, if they can't do a good job in building ICE vehicles and they're going to be doing all this new stuff, what's the likelihood of a success?
No, great question. And maybe we should take a quick commercial break and come back to that. So yeah, we're going to give a shout out to our brand new sponsor, Alex Partners.
The automotive and industrial sectors are undergoing a historic transformation. Electrification, digitalization, supply chain reinvention, regulatory shifts. The pace is accelerating and the pressure to adapt is real. This is not a time for hesitation. It's a time for bold decisions, backed by fast, effective execution. You need a partner who understands complexity, from factory floors to boardrooms, and delivers measurable results. That partner is Alex Partners, when it really matters.
Okay, we're back. We're making some changes here. And you had been talking, Gary, about Lindsay Brooke saying, wait a minute, all new product, all new process, recipe for disaster. Then that was what Jim Harbour always said. And he's right. He's absolutely right. But this isn't something that you can piecemeal. I mean, it's all or nothing in this. It's not something that you can say, well, we'll build a new plant and use existing product and existing machinery. This is going to be all new. And as far as Ford's recalls and all their warranty work goes, I believe it's a systemic problem inside the company. This is my own personal view. I believe it's got to do with all the silos within the organization. You got an engineering silo, a manufacturing silo, a purchasing silo. Even within engineering, you have different silos. I think it's a breakdown between those groups interfacing. And I think the new setup that Ford's got with the Skunk Works in California doesn't use that system at all.
So you don't think that this new vehicle is going to have bolts that are going to be used, and that perhaps those bolts might have a tendency to fracture like this most recent recall? I mean, the Skunk Works is not going to get down to the level of saying these are the bolts we're going to purchase from this company.
Right.
They're going to.
But did purchasing go, oh, these bolts are a whole lot cheaper. Well, let's buy those cheap bolts. That's really, and I'm talking like Sandy Monroe, because Sandy makes that point all the time. Just because you got the cheapest parts does not mean you have the lowest cost.
And I think that, if I was going to counter Lindsay in some way, like, things are not going great right now. Like, maybe this is the perfect time for a fundamental rethink and change, and rather than try to make these incremental improvements that don't move the needle over time, that starting with a fresh platform is not going to be any worse than where they are today in terms of the recalls and quality control problems.
So what if instead of a $5 billion program, they said, let's do a $2.5 billion program, and we'll do this whole new thing, but we'll do it on a smaller scale, and we'll do the same thing in terms of the battery plant that they're building in Marshall.
Yeah, well, the problem is they had this Louisville plant, and they don't have a smaller plant to put it in, not in the U.S. And they went with a plant that looked like the perfect timing. The Ford Escape and the Lincoln Corsair come to the end of their life. It's like, hey, we're going to have to take those products out of the plant anyway. Why don't we use that plant for it?
It's a coup for Louisville.
Right. It's a huge coup. Also, remember, the $5 billion, $3 billion is the battery plant. $2 billion is the plant, the assembly plant, which is a lot of money. And I questioned them on it. I was like, man, $2 billion is a lot to put into an existing plant. And they said, yeah, but when you take into account that we're going to have multiple models in there, now the investment becomes a lot more reasonable.
We have multiple models in there right now, Two,
yeah.
So they would talk going 6 to 8 models and the crossovers. Back to that, I'm a little perplexed why they didn't start with a crossover instead, and they elected to go with the pickup. But yeah, 6 to 8 models is where they'll.
They're one of the things they talked about is they think they've got a sweet spot. They're bragging that this truck will have the interior space of a Toyota RAV4 plus a bed plus a front.
Okay, let me. That is also one of the most absurd things I've ever heard in my life. Okay, have either of you two ever heard Toyota bragging on the interior volume of a RAV4?
I'll bet they have.
I bet they haven't. Okay, and I mean, it's just like, why
pick on that?
Why pick on that? I mean, it makes no sense at all. If it were a vehicle that basically said, it's the roomiest in its class, Toyota has never said that.
Right, but I think what they're getting at, and this comes back to the Maverick argument, it's going to have more interior room than Maverick or any other small truck, and you're going to have this bed. Jim Bombeck, who runs their advanced program, said, crossovers just aren't good for some jobs. He says, you don't want to throw mulch in the back of your crossover. And so that's what they're focusing on, is a very practical vehicle that can meet commercial and retail needs.
And I go back to Pete's Maverick, which is exactly what their argument is for the existence of that vehicle.
Don't you think they had these arguments within Ford? Of course they did.
Do you think over time the Ranger, Maverick, and new EV truck are all options? Do they all? Well, they all here 10 years from now?
One thing that they were asked was, does this platform, can it accommodate an ICE engine?
The new one?
The new one. And they said, well, this is an electric truck. And I was like, yeah, but Scout started off that way. They say now E-Rev, could you do an E-Rev? And Doug Field gave some very vague answer that led me to believe it could take a nice engine if they had to go that way.
Do you hear much about Scout?
No.
Short
answer, no.
No, I was just curious whether, that they seem to now be sort of like lost in the weeds somewhere. That, so the discussion is, we talked at length last week about Slate. We didn't talk about them today.
Yeah, well, this is, Slate does not want to hear about this Ford pickup, I'm sure. This is the last thing they want to hear, that a major automaker is going to have a small electric pickup, not stripped down, that is going to be awfully cost competitive with them.
Don't you think, though, that Slate had to assume eventually they can't assume that they're going to have a market all to themselves.
Correct.
So I feel like this was
right
built into their plan at some point, and now Ford here is first up to the plate to be the Slate competitor, if such a thing exists for a.
Right.
vehicle we haven't seen in production yet, but
totally right. So Slate knew that this was coming, but my guess is the Slate program, probably the Slate program and the Ford program sort of got going around the same time, but very hush, very under the radar. And probably about the time that Slate heard what Ford was doing, and when Ford heard what Slate was doing, they were like, crap, you know?
So what do you guys think of the possibility of General Motors buying Slate?
Why not?
But I mean, what's the...
So I love what you're bringing up here, Gary. So how is GM going to react to this?
Maybe they'll buy Slate.
I mean, it's interesting to think about because I feel like Slate has a potential line on delivery applications. Likewise Ford, you can use you talked about the van that they might build eventually. So the commercial sales aspects for both of these, I think, are perhaps underappreciated today when we're talking about what will consumers want. And Slate with its Amazon underpinnings, I see clear delivery potential with Whole Foods or any number of other ways that they might be used. And, that'd be one aspect to consider, GM sale or not.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of General Motors, which left Cruise Automation, its autonomous technology company, and said, this isn't working out so well. We're not going to make all those billions of dollars we thought we were going to be making by 2030. And we're going to concentrate more on our Super Cruise, which has been well received across the board. And then this past May, they hired a guy named Sterling Anderson who worked at Aurora, which is one of the leading commercial autonomous technology companies that has semis running, I think it's between Dallas and Houston or something like that down in Texas. And suddenly this week, Sterling Anderson gets mentioned again, and General Motors talks about getting back into the game of autonomous driving for personal
Retail
use.
customers.
Pete, what's going on? You cover autonomy more than we do.
It's very interesting. Mary Barra, I think for every quarterly conference call that they've had in the last year or so, maybe the last 4 or 5 calls, has laid out this, we have this vision of personally owned autonomous vehicles that's still on our horizon. And suddenly that starts to seem like it might happen sooner than we think. And, there's an integration of Super Cruise plus remnants of the Cruise team and technology. How they fuse those things together, I think, is very interesting because, as you mentioned, Super Cruise has been well received. Cruise has had well-documented problems. So I do worry a little bit that trying to bring these two things together, maybe they, dilute the good product that they currently have. But, it is interesting. And I think what they mean by autonomous, personally owned autonomous vehicle, I think is still very vague. Are they talking about a level 4 self-driving vehicle that requires no human involvement from driveway to parking spot? That's very different than a lot of the highway assists that are growing more sophisticated, clearly.
I think that it'll be steps. I think
it will be steps.
My guess is the next step, because they've talked about hands off, eyes off. Well, that's level 3. And on, clearly on mapped areas. Okay, what?
I would not necessarily, and this gets into really nerdy weeds, not necessarily say that level 3 and hands off, eyes off are interchangeable. They can be.
Okay.
But they
so is it level 2 plus?
Well, you kind of get back to that.
Once you get into calling things level 3, there's a whole new regulatory mishmash that you got to go through.
There is.
Right?
I mean, then you're at level 3. You're saying I, automaker, assume liability for any crash that may happen when this system is active, and that's why everybody has gone to level 2 plus instead of saying we're crossing this chasm into level 3.
So what would level 4? I mean, wouldn't level 4 have the same liability for the manufacturer?
But they're very different because I think level 3 is a graduated step along the lines of we're going to go from a driver assist system to now a driver assist system that's growing more sophisticated, that still supports a human driver.
Correct.
Level 3 still requires, in fact, a human driver who
At the wheel.
must take over, a licensed human driver that must take over should the system ask. And that's very different to me than level 4, where we say,
Get in the back seat and take a nap.
there's no role for you, human.
Right.
Yes.
I like when you said, that you have to have a licensed human driver. I was thinking, like, what's the alternative? A chimp? I mean,
You never know these days. But through level 3, you need a licensed human behind the wheel. And level 3 kind of gets cloudy as to, yes, automation is now considered a driver in certain scenarios, but that's very different than level 4, where we say humans have no role whatsoever. It's the machine driving all the time.
So, Pete, what do you think about Robotaxi retail sales? You got Waymo expanding like crazy. In China, you've got Pony AI and what's the other one I'm blanking out on? Baidu. And, going crazy in expansion. The Middle East seemingly wants to be the place where all these robotaxis end up. They're very welcoming to them. We just got a report today that Tesla is looking for drivers to test its system in New York City. And yet you had GM go, no, we're not going to do robotaxis after they poured billions into it. How do you read this? The robotaxi versus retail for autonomy.
I do wonder if there's some folks at General Motors who are saying, boy, we bailed on this at precisely the wrong time.
We gave up too easy.
Yes, because here we are in 2025, and I think autonomy in many forms and permutations is really starting to gain traction in both the robotaxi form.
Gary gives me grief for this, but I call 2025 the year of the autonomous vehicle.
I mean, I think you're
mid-August. We're still waiting.
Well, we're not still waiting though. Waymo has 1,500 robotaxis deployed in Phoenix, LA, San Francisco, Austin, Atlanta now. They're making plans elsewhere. We're talking hundreds of cars in those cities. And in San Francisco, Waymo is now the number 2 ride-hailing platform, only behind Uber. It's surpassed Lyft. So
Uber is partnering with Waymo in Atlanta.
So what was that number again? 1,500?
1,500. It's a small.
So if we were to leave the studio, walk 100 feet over there, we'd stand on a 10 mile, and you can see that many in an instant vehicles.
Well, no,
non-autonomous.
I know, but Gary,
the year of the autonomous vehicle.
It's 1901, and there's like 1,000 horseless carriages on the road, and you're standing there going, "Man, this is nothing."
That's right.
It's the old Thomas Edison line. What good is a baby? Baby can't do anything. Give it time.
Well, but you said it's 2025, and here we are.
Because I think we're at the inflection point of the hockey stick growth.
So Pete, let me ask you, do you have any sense of how Waymo is doing economically?
They report when Google, files its, SEC disclosures quarterly. It's a other bets category where Waymo is included in that. And I want to say in the last one, they're losing. Other bets is losing less money than it has before. You could start to do some math too. Like Waymo is now offering 250,000 rides a week autonomously. And if you want to say all right, there's an average of $15 a ride, you start to do some math and say that they're making real revenue. I don't want to say that they're, making more revenue than expenses right now, because I think perhaps Waymo and others are finding out that to start up another city still requires a significant amount of capital. But I think that at the very least, where we did not see real revenue a year ago, when it was more, boy, we've got Phoenix going and maybe a little bit of San Francisco. Now I'd say that is a real business that
is losing money.
That's losing money right now. But as they scale up and continue that, I think that should change.
So
I better. Otherwise, this whole robotaxi model is flawed.
Might make the argument that it isn't the year of something until something actually is making money.
No, I think you got to look at the rate of growth. And, look, Tesla lost money for a decade, and then boom, it turned the corner and things took off. Now, because of Elon getting involved in politics, it's kind of fallen apart. Although we did see something today that was interesting. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little sidetracked. Tesla sales in Norway were up significantly people there they're shrugging off Musk's
They bought
politics and buying
1,500
Tesla.
cars.
But look at the rate of growth, and you can see this with Pony AI. They just reported their first half earnings. The rate of growth is really impressive, and that's what gets investors excited. Because they can start extrapolating out and going, "Oh, I'm jumping on the bandwagon now," and that's where I think we're at. It's time to jump on the bandwagon.
And along with that, I would not be surprised if we saw a Waymo IPO at some point in the next 12 months.
Yes.
Is that because Alphabet basically wants to say, oh, we're sort of done with this?
No, they want to return. And that's how look, that's the Silicon Valley way, right? You put all these bets out, and you know that 90% of them are going to fail, but the ones that hit, oh my God, they become unicorns and you make yourself a fortune. And so, I don't think Waymo or Google is not going to want to continue to invest in Waymo. They want to make some return on the money now.
I think that's fair after 15 years of
losing money.
Project. Yes.
But I'm almost glad they've been sticking with it to lose money for that long. And I agree with you. I think GM gave up a little too quickly. One of my big criticisms of American capitalism is, for most investors, long-term investment, that means the end of the year. They don't have a long-term horizon to get into this technology that takes a damn long time to develop.
Except with the exception of Tesla. Like Tesla is given the longest runway of any company that's publicly traded right now. And I think in some ways, to prove your point, that we see the benefits of that in that they've gotten a long time to percolate and then pivot from EVs to AI and autonomy. And that's still an unsure thing, but boy, you start to see that they're ever closer to a real robotaxi that might be activated via OTA or, I feel like Tesla has gotten the rope and now on the cusp of making meaningful gains there.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens to car sales if robotaxis take off in a big way?
Not much. I don't think that they're competitive necessarily.
No,
I think it's more what happens to ride-hailing taxis. How many cars are like small urban grocery getters? I think it's a tool to use in an urban setting much more. I think public transit probably takes a much bigger hit than car sales.
I think robotaxis will hurt car sales in the future, and especially not us, right? I love to drive. I don't need to take a robotaxi anywhere, but for younger people, especially those who may have gone to college and have a bunch of debt, or they live in urban areas and they only want to pay for transportation when they need it. They don't want this $40,000 vehicle in their driveway or in their parking spot depreciating all the time. They're going to go, what do I need a car for? I'm going to have these robotaxis that'll take me anywhere. And so I think it's going to be a gradual process. But you bet, I think it's going to take car sales away.
So this is going to be very mean of me to say. So what I heard you describe, John, were those people that are going to buy that Ford electric truck.
Mm-hmm. Or not buy it. Right. Maybe they're going to have to make autonomous versions. And, you pull out your app and you have your Ford EV, little truck come and get you.
So Pete, I mean, you covered when Ford decided that it wasn't going to have its company with Volkswagen, that it was going to be developing autonomous technology. What happened there
with Argo many
Argo
years
AI.
ago? I think they were awaiting a third investor that was scheduled to join them and then backed away.
Who do you think that was?
I would suspect it was Amazon,
Hmm.
but don't quote me on that.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that awaiting that third major partner to share the costs and that never materializing. Volkswagen's plans around automation have always been ever shifting, and I think that they kind of backed out, and that was that.
Mm-hmm. So Amazon, it bought Zoox, is that right?
Amazon owns Zoox.
But I
right.
mean, it was an existing company. Amazon bought it, and
Amazon
it
is also an investor in Aurora, today on the trucking side, and I would be very certain to say that Amazon also has other big bets in the autonomous space.
Yeah.
So do you think that, okay, I mean, the Aurora thing is, you get those big prime trucks driving around all the time. And so I'm sure that they would like some autonomy there. Zoox makes toaster shaped vehicles, smaller, and they seem to be, what was the name of that transport vehicle that Cruise was going to have?
The Origin.
The Origin, right?
Right.
Which looked like a toaster that they were developing with Honda. So that's another big Amazon thing, right?
It is, yes. And it's I'd be reticent if I did not mention that Amazon also invests in Plus on the trucking side of things. But to go back to the toaster cars that are made by Zoox, very important development in the last 2 weeks, actually. The Zoox toaster cars, if that's what we want to call them, were not FMVSS compliant. And very recently, they've gotten an exemption to start demonstration projects with their vehicles.
And that was because they didn't have steering wheels.
That was part of it. I think there were 8 different ways in which the Zoox vehicle did not meet FMVSS.
Here's the real problem, and I'd love to get your input on this. They don't meet crash standards. And the exemption that they just got allows them to go on roads up to 35 miles an hour, if I remember right.
Yes.
Heretofore in the United States, if you didn't have a vehicle that met crash standards, it was limited to 25-mile-an-hour roads. So if you go to certain communities, you'll see people driving around in electric golf cars, and perfectly legal as long as they're on 25-mile-an-hour roads. What is going to happen to Zoox when it inevitably gets in an accident on a 35-mile-an-hour road and somebody plows into it and everybody's killed inside there because it doesn't meet crash standards?
Well, I think that's the risk that they're now taking is that won't happen until, or they're going to do these deployments that are small scale enough to limit their exposure. But I think all these companies are essentially running a risk that they're not going to have the big accident until autonomy is so established that they can withstand it. Because let's not forget, you mentioned Cruise, one accident, they went away. Uber's program, one fatal accident, and it was,
in turmoil,
shelved and sold. So I don't think there's any self-driving vehicle company right now that would be impervious to potentially being shut down by one bad fatal crash.
Right.
So I think that they're all hoping, statistically speaking, like they can keep their initial deployments so small that this accident doesn't happen.
Or limit them to 25-mile-an-hour speed limit roads. That's what I mean, if I was a lawyer advising Zoox, stick to 25.
Maybe they will. Maybe the exemption covers up to 35, and maybe there's some street in Las Vegas where they're planning on going and they have to be like, all right, we have to get up to 33 here. Mm-hmm. But maybe they're going to stick to 25. Like that'd be a great question for what do they really plan to do with this now?
People think 25, 35 miles an hour, no big deal. It's only 10 miles an hour. The impact, it goes up exponentially with speed. So a 35-mile-an-hour impact is, and I don't know the math off the top of my head, but it's significantly more than a 25-mile-an-hour crash.
But it's interesting, you were mentioning the situation with Cruise and then the situation with Uber Technologies, and one crash for each, and that pretty much took them out of the picture. And in both cases, those were production vehicles that were being used. And if we have a situation like Zoox, which is a purpose-built vehicle, isn't it even riskier for them to do it that way than it is for these companies saying, well, that meets all the crash specifications, and people are driving these Bolts all the time, and it's not as big a problem?
I don't think it's as big a problem, because I think the problem in those 2 particular crashes were that it was pedestrians that got hurt, not so much the type of vehicle that did the hurting, other than the autonomous technology.
So if a toaster runs you over, it's...
Zoox had a interesting incident, let's call it, with a pedestrian a few months ago. I want to say it was early June, where a scooter rider actually ran into the Zoox vehicle, So let's call it not the fault of the Zoox vehicle initially, but the rider fell over in the road and they were laying there. And as they lay there, the Zoox vehicle then like very close to the downed rider position, moved out of the road. It's very reminiscent of the Cruise crash where the Cruise vehicle dragged a pedestrian. And boy, that was eye-opening. I hope that they've really examined and learned from this incident if they didn't learn from the Cruise one the first time around. But it's certainly curious that Zoox has like more than 3,500 employees. They've been around since 2014. You do wonder why they're not more aggressively deploying it. So I kind of start to wonder, like, is this company ready after all this effort? But I do think part of that has been waiting to get this exemption where they could operate.
Mm-hmm. They certainly have the funding.
You would think bottomless funding, but you also would think there's no company that has a complete blank check for an indefinite period of time. You do wonder what internally they've been told as far as timelines or put up or shut up time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're at the top of the hour. You got another burning topic you want to get into?
Just quickly ask you guys. So go back to the Ford thing, new process, new product. We said, okay, what does General Motors do? What does Stellantis do?
Oh, they got a multiple bonfires elsewhere in the company that they've got to put out. I think obviously they're going to study this. I'm sure there's a lot of discussions going on at Stellantis, but man, they got so many other problems on their plate right now to say, hey, we're going to pivot and do all this other kind of stuff. First, they got to get their house in order.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like limited funding to put out many different bonfires. You could look at the same scenario. Would Stellantis be interested in buying Slate? And don't forget that Chris Barman, the Slate CEO, came out of FCA and Stellantis to go do the Slate project. So there is a tie there that would make some degree of sense if that's where Stellantis would choose to make a big bet right now. I don't necessarily see that, but
they need a small truck.
Yeah, right. Now I like your thinking, Gary. I mean, GM and Stellantis, they got to be holding these discussions. Why don't we just go buy it? Boom, we're done. We're there.
Just like, is there a lesson to be learned? Like, boy, we should have bought Tesla, 15 years ago, and they chose not to. Would someone think through, is Slate a modern day Tesla where they could go scoop them up?
All right. So one more quick one. Okay. So if General Motors or Stellantis buys Slate, would they market it as Slate by General Motors, or would they just say it's a Chevy?
Good.
Or it's a Ram, to be fair to Stellantis.
I mean, I think Slate has a lot of buzz right now, but they don't have a brand that the average consumer knows. So I would think it would be just bring it in-house.
I would keep the name Slate.
I would too. Call it the Chevrolet Slate.
No, I wouldn't. I'd keep Chevy out of it. I would position it like Saturn.
Where would you sell it? You can't do direct, the supplier. Or
no, I mean maybe what you do is you have boutiques in all of your stores. So you sell it in Chevy stores, you sell it in Buick stores, you sell it in GMC stores. Maybe you sell it in Cadillac stores. Really gussied up. Maybe you actually put power windows in those.
Yeah. Gold wraps.
Yeah.
But
no, I'd keep that. And I would
keep the name. I agree. I'd keep the name, but I'd only put it in Chevrolet. Anyway.
Cover my bets.
Yeah. Okay.
We're done.
Pete, thanks so much for coming on the show. Great to have you here. Gary, this has been a lot of fun. Yeah. And we hope you all enjoyed it too.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by